Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for our virtual Meet the Expert session. My name is Morna and I'm part of the My World of Work Live team with Skills Development Scotland. My World of Work Live is all about helping you to understand future careers and the skills that they might need. So in today's session, we're going to cover an overview of the life and chemical sciences sector. We'll have a look at some of the opportunities within that sector, and we'll be speaking to our expert for today, Dr. Douglas Mckenzie from Phyco-F. You'll also have the opportunity to ask Douglas any questions about his career journey and the sector itself. So I'd like to encourage you to get involved as much as possible throughout the session today. So please use the Q&A box to the right of your screen to ask us any questions, and we'll try and answer as many as we possibly can. Also, to let you know that today's session is being recorded, and that's so that any young people who couldn't make it on today can still access the resources. And it will be available for everyone to watch on the My World of Work YouTube channel, so you can go back and rewatch anything that we've been speaking about today. Please don't worry, anything that you can ask can be anything that you want to ask can be anonymous. If you prefer, you just select that option on the Q&A box. So before I introduce you to Douglas, let's have a little look at some of the information for the life and chemical sciences sector here in Scotland. So we call this labour market information. Currently, there are around 18,400 people working in the life sciences industry, and as of 2020, there were around 11,600 people working in the chemical sciences industry, and that's across a huge variety of roles. So it could be anything from technicians, researchers, manufacturers, engineers, even in something like the legal departments. So it's not just science-based as well. There are around 240 chemical science companies throughout Scotland, and for the year 2020, the average salary for jobs in those sectors was starting around £30,000. The life and chemical sciences sector actually adds an estimated £4.798 million to the Scottish economy in 2020, which was an increase of 22% from 10 years previous to that. So what does the future hold? Well, we'll probably be needing around 29,900, so nearly 30,000 new jobs in the life and chemical sciences industries for 2019 to 2029. Again, over a huge number of different roles and sectors there as well. And there will be an 11% estimated future growth in those industries to £5.345 million by 2030. So it's a rapidly expanding and evolving sector if it's something that you're interested in getting into. So today we'll be speaking to Dr. Douglas Mckenzie, who is from Phyco-F. And now Phyco-F are looking to grow microalgae from the byproducts of whisky manufacturing as a potential food source. So Douglas graduated from University of Glasgow, completed a PhD at Queen's University in Belfast, and has founded many different companies, which is quite incredible. But I'll let Douglas introduce himself now and explain his role and Phyco-F a little bit more before we open it up to wider questions. So thank you so much for joining us today, Douglas. Lovely to have you with us. If you're able to give us a kind of a bit of an overview of who you are and what Phyco-F is all about.
Okay, thank you, Morna. So I, as you possibly note from the slide, so I started off very much as an academic scientist. I went through the sort of normal career where I did my degrees, then I worked through various universities and research institutions. And then in '99, I founded my first company. I never thought I would actually do that. There was nothing in my family about setting up companies and things like that. And as you see, I've gone on to set up several after that, all of which are to do with sort of biological sciences and increasingly to do with microalgae as we've gone through. Although, as you also see, I was a zoologist. Indeed, it broke my mother's heart when I said I was going to become a zoologist because she wanted me to be a lawyer or at least a medic. And instead, I decided that animals were my sort of love, and so I went into to study them. And actually, my early career was dealing mostly with things like sea cucumbers and starfish, and I was looking at how basically how they work. But then when you're founding a company, what you have to do is make sure you work on something that you can make money from. So not just things that you're interested in, but things you can make money from. And really within marine biotechnology, most of the application is around microalgae at the moment. So certainly the largest section of it outside of aquaculture anyway. So we've become increasingly interested in that. With Integrin, we were interested in toxic algae. So basically, where some of them produce really quite nasty toxins, and they can get into shellfish. And if you eat shellfish, you end up being potentially very ill, and some of them you can even die of it. And then with Xanthella, we were interested in growing microalgae and finding out how to do that economically. And then with Phyco-F, as they were now moving up scales, and we're looking at how we in Scotland and in the UK can grow microalgae at scale to make some of the products that I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute or two.
Super, fantastic. That was a really great introduction there. Excellent, thank you for that. So I actually got some questions coming through, Douglas, so we'll just jump straight into those. So the young people are sort of picking up on, the microalgae thing that we've got. Like, what do you grow it for, and how do you grow it? That's what they're wondering about.
So what we grow it for? Well, it's interesting. So anything that you can make from fossil oil, you can make from microalgae. And the reason for that is that the oil actually originally came from microalgae millions of years ago, and over millions of years have been compressed in the bottom of the ocean, and then by all the geology coming down them, it forms oil. So you can make biofuels, and so people have done that. There's no technical problem with that. People fly aircraft on algal biofuels. You can get it if you still have a diesel car. You can get algal fuels that are drop-in fuels for it, and then you can make things like plastics. So you make bioplastics again. But most of the use at present, anyway, is for human nutrition. So most of the times you'll come across it is if you go into the health food shop or into the healthy section of the supermarket, you'll see products like spirulina and chlorella, which are usually taken in sort of tablet forms. And there's some interesting ones. So like, for instance, the blue color of Smarties is a compound called phycocyanin, which comes from a microalgae, and it's one of the few natural sources of blue that we actually have. Most things that are blue are actually really quite toxic. The pink color in salmon, for instance, that's astaxanthin, another microalgal product there. So, and also I saw a blue smoothie the other day, which was also using microalgae in it. But also there's a whole range of other things, like say for animal feeds. People are using them to deliver vaccines into fish, things like that.
Oh.
It's a huge range of things. The trick is to find which ones you can actually make money from actually doing.
Wow, that's quite incredible. I actually remember when I was wee and the blue Smartie coming out, and it was such a big thing, like, oh, there's this new colour. That was the blue Smartie. So that's really interesting to know that it's actually coloured from microalgae. That's incredible. Yeah. So I think the follow-on question to that was, our young people wondering, how do you grow it? Like,
yeah. Okay, so microalgae, one of the reasons that they're interesting from a biotechnological viewpoint is that they're really simple organisms in terms of their needs. So they need water, not usually a problem here in Scotland, certainly not today. And they need a carbon source, usually carbon dioxide, which is great because we're trying to find ways of reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. They are related to plants, so they need some of the same nutrients that plants do, so mostly nitrogen and phosphate, some iron, and they need light. So like they are photosynthetic organisms, so they take the light in nature, they get it from the sun, and they turn that light into sugars. Mm-hmm. So that's how they work. So when you're doing it biotechnologically, the easiest way is actually just put them in shallow ponds, and a lot of the microalgae that are made in the Far East, that's basically, they're just huge ponds. And this is mimicking what happens in nature. People have been eating microalgae for thousands of years, and they sometimes get them from lakes and things like that. So the pond just reflects that. But for biotechnology and for really increasing the amounts, you've got to put them into what we call photobioreactors, where we control the conditions of growth. So we control the amount of carbon dioxide, the amount of light, the amount of nutrients that they have. And the difficulty there has been to scale that up from little reactors that sit on your laboratory bench to things that, you know, are tens of thousands of liters in volume, so we can match other industrial processes.
Wow, so I've got this picture in my head of like swimming pools sort of filled with them. Then that's quite amazing. Actually, quite a good question comes through there. So obviously our young people will have heard of like blue-green algae. We see it sometimes when we're out walking dogs and things like that. So how do you ensure that, you know, your big industrial vats and things like that, how do you ensure that they don't get contaminated by maybe the wrong types of algae?
Okay, just a quick biology lesson there. So when we talk about microalgae, they're actually split into two major groups. So there's the group which are the blue-green algae, which are cyanobacteria. So these are actually bacteria. The other algae are what we call eukaryotic microalgae. So they have a nucleus and they have a chloroplast in them as well. And so the microalgae are the one, sorry, the cyanobacteria are the ones that produce those toxins that we see every summer. And you really don't want to let your dog lick that water, because those toxins are really nasty. They're not great for humans, but they're really, really nasty for dogs. So the way, and indeed you see the problem. If we just had open ponds, then how do we stop organisms like that growing in it? Because they're just another cyanobacterium, but they're not a very friendly one, whereas we want the friendly ones to grow. So what you have to do is try and exclude them. So therefore, if you've got a bioreactor, there's no way the sort of nasty ones can actually get in. And you, just like if you're making, say, cheese, you have to look at when you're making cheese to make sure you don't have any harmful bacteria in your cheese as well. So it's just the same sort of process. So you just look for any evidence that you have got harmful ones in your culture, and then you throw away your culture if that happens. But actually, that's quite rare once you move to them, because it's difficult for them to find their way into photobioreactors.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know. Excellent. Good question there. We're following up on, obviously you mentioned about light. So, and you know, is it a specific type of light that the microalgae have to grow under? Obviously thinking about the spectrum, you know, what type of light is it?
That is a good question. I mean, if you think about plants in general, they are green coloured. And they're green because they're actually absorbing red and blue into their chloroplasts, and it's those wavelengths that chlorophyll, which is the pigment that receives the light, absorbs. That's the simple answer. The more complicated answer is, the more we look at it, the more we realise that they seem to do better on a much broader range of light, and it's not entirely clear why. At times it may be because they're using them for cell signaling. But for instance, we find with microalgae, they grow very well in green light, which shouldn't really be happening. So it's not just all about the energy of them. But yeah, again, when you're growing them industrially, you can tweak the light that you give them to different wavelengths, different intensities, different patterns of light, because they don't really require a normal day-night cycle in light. So you can give the light at different times to them and get different results, which is quite interesting. Indeed, the whole thing about light is fascinating. We're just beginning to really unpick the biology that light induces, and the light is not just about energy. It does a whole lot of other things as well, that, as I say, we're only just beginning to scratch the surface in terms of our understanding of.
Fantastic. So I suppose that kind of leads me on. it just seems to be such a vast, really interesting, varied sector, and also Phyco-F and what you're doing. So the young people are saying, like, what other types of jobs are within like a company like Phyco-F? Is it specifically that you have to be a science boffin and you have to go to university and things like that, or could you, what other sort of opportunities are there?
Yeah, well, it's interesting these days. I mean, within companies, obviously you do have technical experts, and you saw I came through a science background, and my number two is he's much more of an algal specialist than I am. But we have an engineer, so he was a process engineer, knew nothing about algae before coming into the company. We have people who look at energy, and indeed. These days, IT people are really important as well, and data analysts. So the output of the company is not necessary. You need a few people who know that technical area, but actually the majority of them, you're much more interested in their broader skills or potentially technical skills, like the engineers. So we need people that can build tanks, people that know about electronics, people that know about software. So there's lots of openings in it. Indeed, if people are thinking about careers, I was thinking about this just before we came on. Think about what it is that interests you, and think about following a career in that, because rather than think about the job too much, think about what interests you, then find a job that matches your interests, and that'll set you up for life.
That's a really good piece of advice, actually. I think that's so many people do say that they're just like, stick with something that you love and that you're interested in. So it's a really good piece of advice there. So would young people need any particular qualifications if they wanted to work for a Phyco-F or a company like yours, or is it more specifically their skills? And if so, what type of skills would you advise?
It sort of depends. Phyco-F at the moment is a startup company, and so it tends to have a limited, well, it's only a small team. There's only about half a dozen of us at the moment, and it's quite common these days when you are in that sort of startup mode that you bring together a team with a specific set of skills, which are often around things like presentation, because you're looking to raise money to actually build the business. So those sort of people, you need good communicators as well. People, I mean, I might be a decent communicator, but I'm not that great when it comes to social media and things like that, and how to make good animations and things like that can really grab people's attention. So you need different skills at that stage than you do later on when a company's much larger and is often much more focused as well. And the range of skills, yeah, again, this is an interesting one. I think you need to be able to work in a team. Team working is very important, but equally you need to be a self-starter. Because in small early stage companies, people don't have time to really hold your hand through things. And they like to be able to, I mean, this is also great because it's great working in that sort of job where you're just told to go do that. If you get a problem, come back. But I'm not going to be looking over your shoulder all the time. And a lot of people love that type of freedom. Other people don't. They want to be told what to do. But yeah, the soft skills are really important. More than the technical skills. You need technical skills to basically get the job in the first place.
Yeah.
But to advance in your career, it's the soft skills that are really important. The ability to work to other people, to listen, to integrate ideas, to be enthusiastic, all those sort of things.
Absolutely.
That are not actually that particularly difficult if you
And that's actually I think that's the good thing. I think that's the encouraging thing for young people as well. They have all these skills. It's just about developing them and encouraging them to sort of express them. So it's really good to know from somebody like yourself that's doing a startup company too, that just be like, yes, technical skills are great, but it's who you are as a person, and having the enthusiasm is just fantastic. So, well, this is actually quite an interesting question. So, obviously, we've had COP very recently. So, do you think your company specifically, and maybe like the wider sort of idea of microalgae, will help try and combat climate change and global warming and things?
Yeah, absolutely. And we could spend a long time discussing exactly how that happens. Um, but if you get back to that bit about how oil came from microalgae in the first place, the problem is that, as I said, it took millions of years to form that fossil oil, and we burnt it in basically 100 years, and so it's released enormous amounts of CO2. So microalgae are busy working away at the moment, re-sequestering that CO2 back into marine sediments, but it's a slow process. So through biotechnology, we can speed that up. And there's a lot of interest because, as I said, it captures CO2. So the more CO2 we can capture, the better. We're also very much involved in enabling companies to reduce their carbon footprint. So I mentioned again with biofuels. So if you use a biofuel that's been made from microalgae, that displaces a fossil fuel, and so therefore you're reducing the total amount of fossil carbon that's going into the atmosphere, which is the problem. The microalgae are also really great at sucking nutrients out of water, and particularly phosphates. Which are a real problem if phosphates get into bodies of water, because they create algal blooms, which sometimes are toxic or remove all the oxygen and then rot and produce methane and things like that. Indeed, just another one just on, not so much microalgae, it hasn't been looked at, but for seaweeds, which are macroalgae, it has been found that they reduce the amount of methane that cattle produce dramatically by about 80%. So if you feed them some seaweeds, they don't fart as much methane, and so actually that helps the climate. So it is strange how these things come round. Yeah, but yeah, we're very much involved in the net zero agenda that's going on. And as I say, we're working with the whisky industry, so they have a target of getting to net zero by 2040, which might sound a long way away, but believe me, it's not. And that's a very big target for them. So they're looking at innovative ways that they can reduce their carbon footprint, and microalgae look as if they're part of that story.
Right, excellent. Well, do you know what? If you've learned nothing else today, feeding seaweed to cows makes them fart less. I mean, that's going to stick in my brain now forever. Fantastic. So I think actually, sort of going on from this, some really insightful questions coming through. Do you think your company, and then again the wider sector of like the microalgae sort of industry, will this help combat food shortages as well?
Yeah, so okay, so again, if we're talking dates now as well, so by 2050, we're projected to be close on 10 billion people on the planet. And when I was born, it was just over 3 billion. So if I make it to 2050, and here's fingers crossed,
yes.
The world population will have almost tripled in that time. And we're going to have to feed those people. And actually, one of the big problem areas is protein. And we will need as much additional protein to feed those people as we currently take out from fish from the sea. And we don't have a second set of oceans. We can't really increase the amount of fish that we're going to eat. So it has to come from somewhere else. And spirulina that I mentioned earlier, which is one of the blue-green microalgae, is a great source of proteins. But 80%, 70 to 80% of it is protein, and it's a good protein. It's more like some animal proteins than it is plant proteins.
Oh.
And because of the simplicity of growing microalgae, we could see ourselves scaling up microalgal production to provide food. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I'm not keen to use microalgae for biofuels, because actually I think they're a lot better as a source of food. And the other good thing that they do is that they make omega-3 fatty acids. Mm-hmm. And so this is what makes eating salmon good for you, because it's one of the few sources that you can get of decent tasting omega-3s. When I was a wee boy, I used to get cod liver oil tablets that tasted horrible, sort of thing, but were a good source of omega-3s. And these are all coming from the sea, and they're all coming from microalgae in the first place. So instead of what we do at the moment is we catch oily fish like anchovies off South America, and then we grind them all up to make this oil, which we need for our good heart function, for our brain development, things like that. Very important to get omega-3. And we could do that all from microalgae without impacting the marine environment, and let the anchovies swim free, and part of the food chains end up in whales and things like that, rather than industrial fishing, which does have a lot of impact.
Yes, yeah, I suppose it's kind of just reminding me very much of like a circular economy, I suppose, then as well. So it's maybe something like a phrase that our young people have heard of too. So this is actually quite a good one, because you mentioned about the whiskey industry. So you're saying that you're using the sort of the byproducts of the whiskey industry. Like, how do you do, like, what is it specifically? I've just got in my brain that you just go with like big shovels and get all the stuff from the whiskey over stuff and then take it back into the lab and do stuff with it. So what is it specifically?
Okay, so there's a couple of things going on with whiskey's distillation. So we are, taking alcohol that's been made from yeast and then concentrating it. But in the first place, you make the alcohol, and actually that stage is very much like brewing, where we've taken from malt whiskey, it's barley, and we grow about 1.5 million tons of barley, which is used, and about half of that goes into making whiskey. So think about it, that's a lot of barley.
That is, yeah.
And the rest of it tends to go to cattle feed. So that barley is then it's dried, and then it's soaked and heated up so that it starts to make sugars. And then you take that sugar-rich water and you feed it to yeast, and the yeast makes the ethanol, and it makes CO2 as a byproduct. And it makes, for every litre of alcohol that you end up with, you produce 755 grams of CO2. So you produce quite a lot from fermentation, and it's a really great source of CO2. It's really pure. It's over 99%, a little bit of ethanol in it. But because our distilleries are all dotted around Scotland, it's difficult for them to actually utilise that CO2. And we have that bizarre thing that recently we were running out of CO2 because it was only coming from a couple of plants. So you can use that CO2 as your source of the CO2 for the microalgae. And the other thing that they produce, so you've basically got all those soaked grains, which traditionally were fed to cattle in the past and still are, but we don't have anything like as many cattle as we had before, and we have a lot more whiskey distilleries. So they're producing that plant material, which needs to be processed. And increasingly they're using a technique called anaerobic digestion, which uses bacteria to break it down, releases more CO2, but also leaves you a residue of nitrogen and phosphate, which, if you remember, were also things that you need to grow your microalgae, and it's separated into water. So there's your other one. So the only thing we have to add at that point is the light. So distilleries can produce 3 out of the 4 byproducts, and at the moment the carbon dioxide is just going up into the atmosphere, and those nutrients are actually quite difficult to handle. If you put them onto land, they can act as a fertilizer, but they can also wash out into the sea or into rivers, cause the problem. It's that circular thing again. We get bad algae rather than good algae. So
wow, gosh, it is so involved. So I never kind of realized the amount of different parts, I suppose, of all the different cycles that it's part of. This is quite amazing. Okay, some nice questions that are coming in. So, like, what would you say are the most enjoyable parts of your work that you do? And then maybe on the flip side of that, like, are there any sort of challenging aspects of the work or the sector?
Okay, I'll deal with it from an individual basis of running a company first. And that's. So I don't look back with any regrets from having left academia. I had a great time being an academic. I got to go in submersibles to the bottom of the ocean and travel around the world, things like that. So that was great, and I loved playing with animals, basically. Running a company, there's a lot more responsibility. You've people that you need to make sure get paid at the end of every month. But I love the variety in my job. I meet lots of different people. I've learned a lot about whiskey now, and about renewable electricity. And actually going through life is nice like that. I mean, to people probably facing up their exams might not seem that way, but actually learning new stuff all the time is a good way to go through life. And it's if you learn something new every day, you feel good about it. So the variety is great. A lot of pressure at times, but that pressure also comes with freedom. You know, I don't, running a company, I don't have to answer to anybody. Nobody really tells me what to do, and so that freedom is a great thing if you can get it into your life, if you can get to that stage. For the sector, yeah, hey, life sciences and the chemical sciences just going to increase in size, particularly life sciences, and we live at an extraordinary time now. I mean, back when I was the age of people listening to this today, had I been told that we could have gone from finding a new virus to having a vaccine in less than a year, that was just science fiction. And an incredible amount of science, and we're getting better and better at that. You know, until we all live forever, there's going to be careers for life scientists, and we're only sort of really just beginning on the journey for that. So, and then there's the climate change stuff. We've got to fix. Well, when I say we, actually, it's the people listening to this. They're the ones that are really going to have to fix this. And it is going to be scientists, it's going to be engineers and politicians who are going to be the ones that actually fix it. So if you want a career where you do good, then these are good areas to be in. And if you're going through life, why not? Why not go into something that does good? And because again, that gives you that satisfaction that you know you're doing a job that you don't just enjoy, but is good for the planet as well.
Excellent. That's a really nice piece, really encouraging piece of advice there, and sort of an insight into that as well. Excellent. So, do you think there was anybody that sort of influenced you to start a career in this field, Douglas?
Well, actually, I suppose in terms of biology, yes, it was my botany teacher. So my parents spent a bit of time in what were the Gilbert and Ellice Islands, right out in the middle of the Pacific, and there wasn't anything to do there, and I really mean there was nothing to do. No TV, no internet. There was hardly any radio and things like that. So I spent a lot of time out on the reef flats and found all sorts of really interesting animals. And I brought them back with me, different days, and brought them back to show to my teacher. I had to be in boarding school for a couple of years while this was going on. And he had no idea what they were, because to be fair, the man was a botanist. But he sent me off to the library. And I found this book called Animals Without Backbones by a bloke called Ralph Buxbaum. And I was just fascinated. And then at that point, I decided I was going to be a zoologist. So it was my botany teacher inadvertently set me down this path. The business bit, no, not really. I sort of almost stumbled into it.
Yeah.
And this often happens, is that you find you're at a place in your life where it's easier to set up your own work than work for other people. And so lots of people end up setting up companies for reasons that have nothing to do with that they'd spotted a great market or something like that. It's just that time in their life to do that.
Yeah, well, that's good as well. And actually, I think that's quite encouraging to our young people as well, thinking, why not? You know, if spotted a bit of a gap in the market, or they've seen, if it's a life sciences sector maybe to get into, and as you said, it's only going to get bigger and there's only going to be more and more opportunities, they could join it as well. So really good. I'm sort of conscious of the time here, so we're doing really well with these excellent questions that are coming through. So has there been any effect? You know, obviously we've had nearly 2 years of COVID. Has it affected you at all in this and your work and your sector?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it depended who you talk to. Some people had a great time. You know, so people who are in the pharmaceutical industry, marvelous. You know, and so if you're involved in virology, vaccines, things like that, this was a great time. For a lot of companies, where they're developing products, they're often, you know, can take 10 years, 20 years to develop a product. And so they were basically unaffected really by it, because people at the pharmaceutical companies were already, when they go to work, they put on PPE and things like that. They have sterile techniques. They test and things like that. So they weren't bothered by it. We were impacted by it quite a bit because we couldn't safely socially distance in our particular laboratories. So that was an issue. But we all learned to work from home, and that's been a bit of an eye opener as well. So there was impacts, definitely, but for the industry as a whole, it probably benefited from it rather than it being a detrimental effect. It has meant that basically all the old guys and women end up working from home because we're actually not needed in the laboratories, things like that. So it's all the youngsters that were having to go into work, and we all just has spent the past 2 years sitting at home in front of our computers. But it's an interesting thing. So, I mean, people will have in their heads an idea that working life science particularly is in the laboratory. If you see it on television, there's always somebody in a white coat pipetting into plate. But actually, it's like every other job these days. Most of the time spent in front of computers. People do spend time in the lab, but actually computer skills are really important for, as it is with anything these days.
Yep.
But in life sciences, yes, because we're generating so much data. And again, getting back to the coronavirus, I mean, that ability that we can now foresee how it's going to evolve before it does, because they have computer models that look at every single gene and every single potential mutation. And that was actually why that new variant caused so much upset, was not because it was killing lots of people or putting them in hospital, but because the biologists could see where the mutations were, and that worried them. And we will see in about a week's time how justified that worry was.
Oh, so sorry there. Right. Well, I'm afraid we might have to finish. That's such a shame. So sorry about that. I think we've lost Douglas. Well, I don't know about you, everybody, but that was absolutely fascinating. So many good pieces of advice there. So I've thought that was really, really insightful, really interesting, good ideas from what Douglas was saying, and quite amazing to think that a sector to do with something as small as microalgae is potentially going to have a massive impact on our lives. So if you need any more information, advice, guidance, anything like that on all things career related, first port of call would be to speak to your careers advisor at school. And you can also find out more on our website at myworldofwork.co.uk. So you'll find loads of information there that can help you make choices about your career. If you'd like some inspiration on what you'd like to do, there's some tools that will help you understand your strengths and lots of job profiles for you to explore. So exactly what Douglas was saying, your strengths and your skills are really, really important. So it's definitely something to sort of start focus on now and just continuously develop, because you will already have them. And even things outside of your school life, maybe working in a shop, or having a part-time job, or being in a sports team or something like that, having these additional skills will be really, really helpful in the future. So obviously we touched upon it with Scotland having just hosted COP26 and learning about the potential for new food sources in this session today. So please also have a look at the Green Careers page on the My World of Work page. So that'll give you a good starting point for how current jobs are evolving to become more green and ecologically beneficial for the Scottish economy. So that's myworldofwork.co.uk/green-careers. If you want to learn any more about Scotland's sectors or how to get into the areas of work, have a look at the apprenticeship.scot website. So some examples of related apprenticeships that we might be speaking about today would be like a foundation apprenticeship, which is something you can start in school. In scientific technologies, for example, would be an excellent way to start a career learning about the benefits of STEM. Then you can maybe move into something like a modern apprenticeship in industrial applications. That course crosses into a range of different sectors, including life sciences, but also food and drink production, supply chain. So if you think of yourself as being quite a practical person, you maybe love problem solving, that's maybe a good one for you there. Douglas was speaking about something like, having all the maybe individuals with computer skills and the amount of information that they're getting from the work that they're doing. So they have to have data analysts. Another modern apprenticeship would be a data analytics one. So That's where you would be looking at all the information that we gleaned from research and things, spotting trends and patterns. So if you think, oh, I'm quite a good problem solver, I, have an interest in these kind of things, that's a really good one for you too. So as we mentioned at the beginning of the session, it has been recorded, so you can view it as many times as you want at a later date. So we also have popped up a little link there and also a QR code for any feedback that you have on the session today. It'd be wonderful to hear your thoughts. Finally, to say a massive thank you to Douglas for joining us. Such a shame that we've lost him there at the end, but also to you out there that's joining us as well. Thank you. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.